Chapter 11. Self-Domestication. Upon entering the Developmental and Comparative Psychology Laboratory at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, 3-year-old participants engage in a series of tasks. First, they meet a hand puppet named Max and an experimenter for a warm-up, which allows them to get comfortable. As part of the warm-up, the experimenter uses some familiar objects in a typical way, such as using a colored pencil to draw. Then the child has a chance to use the same objects. After the child's turn, Max has a chance with the objects. Sometimes Max uses the object incorrectly. For example, by using the wrong end of the pencil to draw. Most kids immediately point out Max's mistake, and the few who don't will highlight these mistakes once asked about Max's actions. For the children, this establishes that Max sometimes makes mistakes, and that it's okay to point these out. In the next phase of the experiment, the child and Max are sitting at a table, and Max decides to take a nap. At a nearby table, off to the side, an adult is performing a multi-step procedure using several unfamiliar objects. For example, one of these target tasks involves a styrofoam board with a gutter, a wooden block, and a black suction head. The adult at the other table, the model, puts the wooden block on the board and uses the suction head to push the block across the board into the gutter. Without looking at or addressing the child, the model either A, acts like he knows what he's doing and is familiar with the task, or B, acts like it's all new to him and he's making it up as he goes along. Then, after the model finishes, the original experimenter returns and brings the unfamiliar objects over to the child, saying, "Now you can have it." The child can do whatever he or she wants with the objects, while the researchers covertly record any imitation of the model by the child. Finally, Max wakes up, and it's his turn to have a go at the objects. He uses the unfamiliar objects in perfectly sensible ways, but in ways that are different from how the model used them. This is the key moment in the experiment. The researchers carefully record the child's reaction to Max as he uses the objects in divergent ways. Most children immediately protested against Max's aberrant actions, both when they had seen the confident model and when they'd seen the model who wasn't quite sure what he was doing. However, the kids protested much more when they'd seen the confident model. Many of these protests were in a normative form like, "No, it does not go like this," or "You must use this." Other times, the children just gave commands, such as, "No, don't put it there." The kids who most accurately imitated the model themselves were more likely to react in protest. Yet even those who had only weakly imitated the model reacted negatively to Max's deviations from what the model had done. It was as if they had inferred a social norm without having themselves mastered the techniques necessary to live up to the local standards. The psychologist Mike Tomasello and his collaborators have performed many experiments like these, all of which tell the same story. By observing others, young children spontaneously infer context-specific rules for social life and assume these rules are norms, rules that others should obey. Deviations and deviance make children angry and motivate them to instill proper behavior in others. What's striking about these findings is that children can and will do all this without any direct teaching or pedagogical cues, like pointing or eye contact, from adults. Though no doubt these must help convey the rules in many circumstances. The children's peculiar motivations to reprimand Max's actions are not imitated from adults in the experiment, because no adult ever reprimands Max, but instead are spontaneously applied by the child to violations of inferred rules. This experiment illustrates one of the essential features that distinguish human social life in all societies from that of other species. We live in a world governed by social rules, even if not everyone knows the rules. Many of these rules are arbitrary, or seem arbitrary, for example, fish taboos in Fiji. Others care whether we follow these rules, and react negatively to violations. We infer that others care about whether we follow these rules. As in the small-scale societies discussed in earlier chapters, the social world faced by our Paleolithic ancestors would have been increasingly shaped by the emergence of an immense variety of norms, and by the selective spread of specific norms packaged in institutions that fostered success in intergroup competition. From the gene's-eye view, survival and reproduction would have increasingly depended on the abilities of one's bearer, the individual, to acquire and navigate a social landscape governed by culturally transmitted local rules, those appropriate to whatever group a particular gene happened to find itself in. Typically, in small-scale societies, as in many communities, the sanctioning of norm violators begins with gossip and public criticism, often through joking by specific relatives, as with Kula, and then intensifies to damage marital prospects and reduce access to trading and exchange partners. If violators are still not brought into line, matters may escalate to ostracism or physical violence, for example, beatings, and occasionally culminate in coordinated group executions. In parallel with how wolves were domesticated into dogs by killing those that wouldn't obey and refused to be trained, human communities domesticated their members. In research in the villages of Yasawa Island, my team and I have studied how norms are maintained. When someone, for example, repeatedly fails to contribute to village feasts or community labor or violates food or incest taboos, the person's reputation suffers. A Yasawan's reputation is like a shield that protects them from exploitation or harm by others, often from those who harbor old jealousies or past grievances. Violating norms, especially repeatedly, causes this reputational shield to drop and creates an opening for others to exploit the norm violator with relative impunity. Norm violators have their property, for example, plates, matches, tools, stolen and destroyed while they are away fishing or visiting relatives in other villages, or they have their crops stolen and gardens burned at night. Despite the small size of these communities, the perpetrators of these actions often remain anonymous and get direct benefits in the form of stolen food and tools, as well as the advantages of bringing down a competitor or dispensing revenge for past grievances. Despite their selfish motivations, these actions sustain social norms, including cooperative ones, because, crucially, perpetrators can only get away with such actions when they target a norm violator, a person with his reputational shield down. Were they to do this to someone with a good reputation, the perpetrator would himself become a norm violator and damage his or her reputation, thereby opening themselves up to gossip, thefts, and property damage. This system, which Yasawans themselves can't explicitly lay out, thereby harnesses past grievances, jealousies, and plain old self-interest to sustain social norms, including cooperative norms like contributing to village feasts. Thus, individuals who fail to learn the correct local norms can't control themselves, or repeatedly make mistaken violations are eventually driven from the village after having been relentlessly targeted for exploitation. Over our evolutionary history, the sanctions for norm violations and the rewards for norm compliance have driven a process of self-domestication that has endowed our species with a norm psychology that has several components. First, to more effectively acquire the local norms, humans intuitively assume that the social world is rule-governed, even if they don't yet know the rules. The violation of these rules could and should have negative consequences. This outcome means that the behavior of others can be interpreted as being influenced by social rules. This also means that, at a young age, we readily develop cognitive abilities and motivations for spotting norm violations and avoiding or exploiting norm violators, as well as for monitoring and maintaining our own reputations. Second, when we learn norms, we, at least partially, internalize them as goals in themselves. This internalization helps us navigate the social world more effectively and avoid temptations to break the rules to obtain immediate benefits. In some situations, internalizations may provide a quick and efficient heuristic that saves the cost of running the mental calculations that consider all the potential short and long-term benefits and probabilistic penalties of an action. Instead, we simply follow the rule and abide by the norm. This means that our automatic and unreflective responses come to match the normatively required ones. Other times, internalized preferences may merely provide an additional motivation that goes into our calculations. The experiments involving Max are cool because we get a look at kids' reactions to novel, arbitrary rules for specific contexts. These rules aren't about cooperation or helping others. They are just context-specific rules. Nevertheless, kids automatically infer that they are social norms and get mad when they are violated. More important, this same pattern emerged when psychologists focused on studying altruism in children during the 1960s and 1970s. In the classic experimental setup, a school child is brought alone to a testing area to get acquainted with an experimenter. The child is then introduced to a bowling game and shown a variety of attractive prizes that he or she can obtain with tokens won in the bowling game. The child is also shown a charity jar for poor children and can voluntarily put some of his or her winnings from the game into it. This jar often has a March of Dimes poster or some facsimile posted behind it. A model, who could be a young adult or another child, demonstrates the game by playing for 10 to 20 rounds. On preset rounds, the model wins some tokens and donates some of these tokens to the charity jar. Children experience one of three situations. 1. A generous person who puts lots of tokens in the charity jar. 2. A stingy person who puts only a few tokens in the jar. Or 3. No demonstration. After the demonstration is complete, the child is left alone to play the bowling game and to donate to charity if he or she wants. The results of many versions of this experiment demonstrate 4 key findings. First, children spontaneously imitated the model, becoming either more generous or more selfish, depending on which model they saw. Those who saw the generous model gave more than children in the no model condition, while children who saw the stingy person gave less than children in the no model condition. Second, beyond merely the effects on their donations, children also imitated other aspects of the model's behavior, including the model's verbal statements. Children even repeated verbal statements from the model when they seemed to contradict their own and the model's actual behavior. That is, they say how important it is to give to poor children, but then not give much. Third, the effect of exposure to a model, generous or stingy, endures for weeks or months in retests. But the effect does not extend to quite different contexts, those that don't resemble a bowling game. Finally, children readily imitate standards for self-reward or self-punishment, and readily impose those standards on others. When children are assigned to help a younger novice with the bowling game, they will often demonstrate generosity to the novice, and then impose the standard they've acquired on the novice by scolding her or him if he or she doesn't spontaneously adopt it. Overall, children are not culturally learning to be altruistic in some general or dispositional sense. They are acquiring norms about proper behavior in the bowling game context, and those behaviors include proper donation sizes. Because they have inferred that social norms exist, they impose these behaviors on other children in the same way that the puppet Max was reprimanded for his mistakes. How altruism is like a chili pepper. It's clear that when people encounter a new situation, they try to figure out which norms, among those they've already acquired, might apply to the situation, and are also prepared to acquire new norms specific to this unfamiliar context. With this in mind, we can now look at findings from economic games. In classic experimental social dilemmas, two or more strangers interact anonymously and make decisions that influence both their own payoffs and those of the other players. All decisions in these experiments are real in the sense that these decisions are implemented and determine how much money people take home. Many valuable insights about social norms and psychology come from the use of economic games. Properly interpreted, economic games are valuable tools for measuring social behavior and for teasing apart the complex packages of motivations, understandings, and beliefs that jointly influence decisions. Well-known economic games include the prisoner's dilemma, ultimatum game, and dictator game. To understand these experiments, imagine this situation. You enter an experimental economics laboratory at Big City University. It's filled with college-age strangers seated at computer terminals. You are told to sit down at an open terminal, which has partitions that prevent others from seeing your screen. After some preliminaries, the computer screen informs you that your ID has been randomly assigned to interact with another person in the room, but neither you nor this person will ever know the other's identity. You each make one decision, and the game is over. If you get any money from this decision, it will be added to your show-up fee, which is $20. You will receive all money in cash at the end as you exit. In this interaction, you have been randomly assigned to the role of the proposer, and the other person is the responder. As the proposer, it's your job to divide $100 between you and the other person by making an offer between $0 and $100, in increments of $1, to the responder, who knows everything except your identity. The responder then has two choices. They can either accept your offer or reject it. If the responder accepts, he or she will receive your offer, and you get the remainder. If the responder rejects, you both get nothing, no money. This means you'll go home with only your show-up fee. This is the ultimatum game. Using game theory, we can determine what a person would do if they were interested only in maximizing their take-home pay. To figure this out, put yourself into the shoes of the responder. If the proposer offers you any money more than $0, you face a choice between $0, if you reject, and some positive amount of money, if you accept. If, for example, the proposer offers you $1, You can leave with $1 more by accepting it. Thus, if you are a money-maximizing responder, you should accept any positive offer. Proposers, realizing this, should offer only $1, which would be accepted. If humans were money maximizers, ultimatum game experiments should reveal many low offers and few rejections of non-zero offers. Not surprisingly, it turns out that this never happens in any human society. By contrast, experiments with primates show little or no evidence of motivations besides narrow self-interest in dealing with strangers. Chimpanzees, for example, never reject in the ultimatum game. In Western societies, most people offer half, $50 out of the $100, and enough people reject offers below 50% that it doesn't pay to give less than half because the risk of having your offer rejected is too great. Interestingly, among people over about the age of 25, this willingness to offer 50% is mostly not driven by concerns about being rejected. To explore this, we can turn the ultimatum game into a dictator game by removing the possibility of rejection. In the dictator game, the proposer gives some portion of the $100 to the other player, and the proposer keeps whatever is left. If people were strictly self-interested, the proposer would give nothing to the other player and take home the entire $100. But rather than giving $0, most Western adults continue to give half. This outcome suggests that people have an internalized equality norm toward strangers, applicable in this context, that is calibrated to allow them to effortlessly and without constant strategic recalculation navigate through a world with punishers, like the responders in ultimatum games, who would sanction them for keeping too much for themselves. But people continue to adhere to the norm even when no punishment is possible and no consequences outside the game are plausible. My collaborators and I have systematically performed economic games across diverse societies and among chimpanzees. In humans, the evidence is clear that such games often tap social norms that people bring into the laboratory from their social lives outside, and consequently, gameplay varies dramatically across societies. In modern industrialized societies, these experiments often measure social norms that regulate impersonal exchange and other social interactions, and evolved culturally to facilitate mutually beneficial interactions in large-scale societies with lots of strangers and anonymous interactions. The strength of these impersonal norms, though unusual, is a key feature of many modern societies. By contrast, the smallest-scale human societies tend not to offer very much, nor reject low offers, because they lack social norms for monetary exchanges with strangers or anonymous others. However, when games are played repeatedly in the laboratory, participants begin to develop lab-specific social norms as they adapt to a new context. These social norms include motivations, beliefs, and expectations, including concerns about what other people will think of those who violate whatever norms govern the game. It's automatic. Internalized social norms help guide us through complex social environments, allowing people to automatically, without conscious reflection or complex mental calculations of the reputational consequences, do the right thing, that is, comply with local norms. This can be seen in how people respond in the public goods game. The structure of this game captures the logic of real-life situations, like recycling, giving blood, paying taxes, and defending the community, in which the group does best if everyone cooperates, but the individual does best if he or she acts selfishly while everyone else cooperates. In this classic cooperative dilemma, individuals are placed into groups with three strangers for a single interaction. Each person gets $4 to start. Without knowing what others will do, they have to contribute between $0 and $4 to a common project. Whatever enters the project is doubled and then distributed equally among all four group members, regardless of whether they contributed. To highlight the cooperative dilemma, consider that the group gets the highest payoff if everyone contributes all four of their dollars to the common project. 4 times $4 is $16. This money doubles to $32 and is distributed equally so that everyone goes home with $8, twice what each started with. However, every individual does best if they keep their $4 and free ride on those who contribute to the common project. For example, if 3 people contribute $4 and one free rider contributes nothing to the common project, then the 3 contributors go home with $6 each, and the free rider goes home with $10, his initial $4 plus the $6 he got from the common project. If 3 people free ride and only one person contributes his entire $4, then the free riders go home with $6 each, while the contributor gets only $2. Thus, those aiming to maximize their payoff should contribute 0. However, most educated Westerners agree that, if asked, players should contribute all the money to the common project. Among the typical experimental subjects, undergraduates, the average contributions are commonly between 40% and 60%, with many people contributing either 100%, cooperators, or 0%, free riders. To examine whether high contributions in the public goods game and pro-social choices in other such games result from automatic norm following, David Rand and his colleagues examined the relationship between the time people spent making their contribution decisions and the size of their contributions. One chart shows one of Dave's findings. The more rapidly participants made their decision, the higher their contribution was to the common pool. That is, quick gut responses were more cooperative. Such findings are provocative, but it could be that cooperative people happen to also be people who respond quickly to questions. To address this, Dave ran participants through the same experiment again, but this time, rather than letting them take however long they wanted, people were randomly put into one of 3 different treatments. They were alternatively 1. Forced to answer in less than 10 seconds, 2. Unconstrained as before, or 3. Forced to delay their decision for 10 seconds and asked to reflect on it. Another graph shows the results. Under time pressure, participants were more cooperative. When forced to delay and reflect, participants became less cooperative than when they were unconstrained. Rand and his team showed the same effects across many different experiments, including experiments in which they unconsciously cued participants to either reflect or go with their gut. Going with one's gut leads to more cooperation if you have the appropriate norms. Earlier, we noted how young children immediately express anger when Max violated a social norm that the children had inferred. This fits well with much work on rejections in the ultimatum game. Not only do people from some societies get angry when they receive a low offer, but also the participants are quicker when deciding to reject low offers. By contrast, deciding to accept a low offer, the rational and self-interested thing to do, seems to take much careful consideration. When placed under time pressure for their responses, individuals from these societies reject more of the unfair offers. In one experiment, researchers used drugs to reduce people's impulse control, serotonin depletion. Loss of their impulse control resulted in more rejections of low offers, but not of 50-50 offers. Negative emotional reactions are our automatic and unreflective response to norm violations and norm violators. The power of norms in economic games first impressed me in 1995 when I was administering the ultimatum game among the Matsagenka in the Peruvian Amazon. Lacking strong social norms specifying equality toward strangers in monetary exchanges, these people were happy to be offered any money in the game, didn't expect proposers to offer half, and weren't inclined to punish proposers for low offers. Nearly 20 years of subsequent research across 24 diverse societies showed that these sentiments are common in the smallest scale human societies. Converging evidence for the importance of norm psychology in economic decisions comes from the economist Eric Kimbrough. Late one night, while returning from a pub in Amsterdam, Eric noticed that people waited at the walk, don't walk lights on the street, even at broad intersections when no cars were in sight. Inspired, Eric used this observation to create an experiment in which participants first played a very simple game. They were given a pool of money that would begin slowly draining as their little avatar walked down a virtual street on their screen. Whatever money remained in their pool when the avatar reached the other side of their screen was theirs to take home. Following an explicit rule, the avatar would automatically stop at red lights along the virtual street and wait, while the money would continue to drain from the participant's account. To make the avatar go, players only had to press a key, any key. While they could make their avatar go at any time, regardless of the light's color, many people waited at all the lights for green. After this rule-following game, participants played economic games like the ultimatum, dictator, and public goods games. The results confirmed Eric's suspicions. The amount of time people waited at the lights was associated with making more equal offers in the dictator game, contributing more in the public goods game, and punishing low offers more frequently in the ultimatum game. Observance of a costly non-social rule, like waiting at traffic lights, appears to be underpinned by the same psychological machinery as complying with and punishing social norms in behavioral games. As both Adam Smith and Friedrich Hayek argued long before Eric and me, it's our automatic norm following, not our self-interest or our cool, rational calculation of future consequences, that often makes us do the right thing and allows our societies to work. This means that how well a society functions depends on its package of social norms. And in the brain. The effects of internalizing norms can be seen in our brains when economic games are combined with tools from neuroscience. When people cooperate, give to charity, or punish norm violators in locally prescribed ways, the rewards circuits in their brains fire up. Some of these are the same circuits that fire when people are rewarded with money or food. Yet in these costly social contexts, the circuits are firing despite the fact that individuals are actually losing money. Neurologically speaking, people like to comply with norms and punish norm violators. Using these brain imaging tools, it's instructive to consider what people's brains do when we decide to break a social norm. Consider lying. Neurologically, lying requires most people, though presumably not lawyers or car salesmen, just kidding, to override their automatic or unreflective reactions by engaging those brain regions responsible for cognitive control and abstract reasoning. That is, violating a social norm requires mental effort and higher cognition. Most Westerners, for example, have to override an internalized norm to lie to strangers in many contexts. Note, of course, that intentionally not telling the truth isn't always a norm violation, such as with white lies. And in many places it's considered totally fine, if not encouraged, to lie to strangers or foreigners to benefit oneself or one's family. No override needed. Why would natural selection have built us to be norm internalizers? Broadly speaking, internalizing motivations helps us to more effectively and efficiently navigate our social world, a world in which some of the most frequent and dangerous pitfalls involve violating norms. Such motivations may help us avoid short-term temptations, reduce cognitive or attentional loads, or more persuasively communicate our true social commitments to others. The logic here parallels that which we encountered in Chapter 7, where I explained how cultural learning could overcome an innate aversion to chili peppers and other spices in order to reduce the dangers of meat-borne pathogens. Reinterpreting the pain as pleasure helps individuals navigate the ecological landscape by solving an adaptive problem, meat-borne pathogens, without us even being aware of it. Analogously, internalizing norms as tastes help us more easily and intuitively navigate the social landscape.